Well, we are very blessed to have Tammy Nix as our speaker today. She's a Christian licensed professional counselor and licensed chemical dependency counselor who's worked in her field for over 10 years. She's a member of the LifeSpring Behavioral Health Team in the Woodlands and has worked with people of all ages, supporting them as they deal with a variety of life issues, including ADHD, stress, depression, anxiety, and many other challenges. ADHD is a very prevalent issue in our society, so it's important to learn more about it. So whether you're here as someone who has ADHD, you know someone with ADHD, or you're a teacher who has students with ADHD, you're in the right place. So I'll turn it over to Tammy now.
All right, good morning. Thank y'all very much for having me today. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this subject specifically. This is one that is on my heart a lot, that a lot of people are struggling with. I'm also going to turn my timer on. There's not a clock in here, so I got to keep myself accountable. So there's a lot of people that struggle with it and a lot of misunderstandings of ADHD. And so today I want to just spend some time clearing up some misconceptions, explaining what it is, maybe providing some science side of it, but also making it relatable and understandable terms that we can understand, and just exploring some of the differences of how it impacts kids versus adults, men versus women, girls versus boys, and be able to talk about it in a way of what's most important to me: empathy and compassion. When I speak, the heart of me speaking is that we can be compassionate towards ourselves and compassionate towards others. And so being sure that we integrate that into our learning and our information about ADHD is really important to me. And so first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give an explanation. And the handout that I've given you, it follows what I'm talking about. So not everything I'm talking about is on there, but I put the key points on there so that you don't have to write all that down. But there's room to make notes too if there's information that you want to write down. And so first of all, what I want to talk about is what a neurodevelopment disorder is. So a neurodevelopment disorder is a group of conditions that begin in childhood and involve differences in brain development. They affect how people learn, behave, socialize, and manage emotions. And so the key thing that I want to point out there is that it is a difference in brain development. So we're talking about a biological disorder. We're talking about that the person's brain functions differently than what we would consider the typical or average brain to function. And so when we think about that, other examples are of neurodevelopment disorders, that's quite a mouthful, include autism, spectrum disorder, learning disorder, and intellectual disorder. And it's interesting because I feel like we tend to be more familiar with those things as disorders and show more empathy and compassion for them because it's more prevalent in our society vocabulary. Like, it's just, those are things we talk about, whereas ADHD isn't one that we talk about as much. And so ADHD can be, well, let me give you the statistic. ADHD is highly heritable. It runs in families about 70 to 80%. So when we're talking about the biological side of it, 70 to 80% of it is biological. There's a genetic component to it. However, we have found through research that things like premature birth or prenatal exposure to substances can also impact how the brain is functioning and cause ADHD. But 70-80%, we're seeing it. It's a genetic thing. And so what is ADHD? Let's define that first. So attention deficit hyperactive disorder The definition is a neurodevelopment disorder marked by patterns of inattention, impulsivity, and or hyperactivity that interferes with functioning or development. So the key word I want to point out there is interferes. Because sometimes people will be like, oh, well, a lot of people I know struggle with this part, or a lot of people I know struggle with this thing. And we can all struggle with those different markers of inattention or hyperactivity, but it's when it interferes with our daily functioning, with our work, with school, with our relationship, that then we meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. And I think a lot in the past, people were very dismissive of it because if you take one of those things, we can look at it and go, oh, a lot of people struggle with that, or that's just a developmental thing, or that's a parenting issue, or all these different things. And what we need to do is be able to recognize that it's when a person has those things and it interferes with their daily functioning, that then it's diagnosable as ADHD. And so just to also clear up a misconception is a lot of times with ADHD, we focus on the hyperactivity part of it. And so people think, oh, well, I'm not hyper, so I don't have ADHD, or my kid's not hyper, so they don't have ADHD. There's different types of ADHD, and there can be the hyperactive, impulsive type, but that's not always how it shows up. And so when we look at it, we have to remember that it affects how we organize thoughts, how we regulate emotions, how we regulate time management, and tasks that we do. So it's much bigger than that. And what we're finding is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a little bit, but what we're finding is that so much research was done on boys, and boys tend to be the hyperactive type. Women tend to be the inattentive type. So if you think about what we would think of as like a stereotypical hyperactive boy bouncing off the walls everywhere, and we go, oh my goodness, that's hard to manage and everything. For women and girls, typically take that busyness and put it in here. And that's what is going on, is that they're having that same crazy hyperactivity, but it's here in their brain instead of displayed outwardly where people can see it and identify it more easily. And so keeping in mind while we're talking that we are talking about it can be hyperactivity, but we need to remember hyperactivity in the brain can be just as distressing as hyperactivity within the body. And so when we think about it that way, if you think about it, it would be like if I'm trying to listen to one person talk, but there's 5 other people talking around them and a TV on in the background. And you get frustrated and you're like, I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to focus, but all this stuff is going on around me. That's what it's like inside the brain of someone with ADHD. That constant fight, that constant need to drown out the silence, to keep focused, to stay focused. And what we know now that we didn't know before is it's not that they won't pay attention. It's not that they won't sit still. It's not that they won't focus. It's that they can't. And their brain is having to learn new skills, new pathways to be able to do the same skills that someone without ADHD doesn't have to do. They don't have to do those harder things. And so it's interesting because when I was looking at the history of ADHD, I had kind of forgotten about this, but the early description of ADHD, so this was in 1902, pediatricians literally diagnosed people. The symptoms were described as having defective moral character or poor inhibition. That's tragic. It's tragic for their kids. It's tragic for the parents raising kids who were told, Like, make them do right. Make them do better. What's wrong with your kid? To kids that were told, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Why can't you just focus? Why can't you just do the right thing? And not knowing all this time that it's a brain functioning issue, and we're pinning it on character. We're pinning it on sugar. We're pinning it on upbringing. And we were so wrong, and so many people. So think about that in 1902. Then it wasn't until the 1950s that people even started rethinking about it, and they relabeled it as hyperkinetic impulsive disorder. So, there's just something nervous system wise that keeps them busy. That's what it is. So that's in the 1950s. In 1980s is when we finally introduced a term ADD, attention deficit disorder, to the DSM, which is how we diagnose disorders. So let's think about that. Let's conceptualize that and go, okay, so in the 80s is when we finally started getting, wait, there's something more going on here than just busy, just crazy. There's something more. So think about how many people we know that are living now, friends of ours, that we're still being told, you're just bad, you're wrong, you're broken, you have a character issue. And so right now I think we have a really high crisis of people where their self-esteem and self-worth is really impacted because they had a disorder, a biological disorder that people treated like it was something else, like it was a character issue. And that's why I think now is a really important time for people to be educating themselves about it so that we can stop those misconceptions, but also so that some people can find healing from not knowing what they were struggling with, what they were going through, and having an experience that was really harmful or hurtful to their development as far as their emotional well-being goes, as far as their self-esteem goes. So I think we have kind of a crisis right now of adults who not only struggle with the disorder, but on top of it struggle with their self-worth because of how they were treated and because of how it was talked about. And so to me, education is really important because then we go to our next one and it's like in 1987, we finally shifted to ADHD and we understood it a little bit better. It wasn't until 2013 that the DSM-5 came out and we had diagnostic criteria that helped us diagnose it as a biological disorder and helped us also have the ability to diagnose an adult if they weren't diagnosed as a child. And so what's interesting is when I looked at the statistics, I looked at 2024, I looked into the CDC's statistics. In 2024, from the age of 3 to 17, roughly 6 million children were diagnosed with ADHD. That's 9.8% of the population. So one, that tells me if almost 10% of the population is struggling with this, we better be open to learning about it and open to helping these people learn in different ways and integrate in different ways. But what was even more staggering to me is that in 2024, the estimated amount of adults diagnosed with ADHD was 4.4%. Half of the number of children. And so as someone who's really into research, that makes me scratch my head and go, wait, what happened to the other 5%? So we are looking at 5%. If the statistics, if we're looking at them and going, they're pretty good and the research is done, it's been done, and 10% of kids are diagnosed, then we would also assume that 10% or more, if late diagnosed, because ADHD doesn't go away. We don't grow out of it. It doesn't just disappear. And so that's a large number. So that on my way here this morning, I'm thinking, what is 5% of the population in the United States? So I pick up my phone. Okay, Google, what's 5%? Over 17 million people. That was shocking.
And those are the people
to me.
that are diagnosed.
Those are the ones that are, well, and those are the ones that I believe are undiagnosed, like the same. So it's like 4% are diagnosed, but if we're looking at a 10% statistic, then we can pretty much assume that 5% of adults are not diagnosed. And so it's like that many people are diagnosed, but that many people, over 17 million people, struggling with a significant disorder that we put in the same category as learning disabilities and autism, and they're undiagnosed, going through life not even knowing that life is harder for them than the average person, or maybe knowing and trying to explain it, but not understanding themselves and being misunderstood by others. That's a huge statistic. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to go a little deep into ADHD just briefly for those that are interested, and then we're going to talk about some coping skills and how it kind of affects daily life. But with ADHD, we're going to talk about the brain chemistry of it. And so when we talk about the brain chemistry, we have something called neurotransmitters. So in our brain, there's these neurons, there's these pathways that are here that send and receive information. And what helps send and receive information are these chemicals called neurotransmitters. So it's much like texting. I'm texting you and I need this message to go to you. And these neurotransmitters are AT&T traveling that little message over to whoever I'm texting. And so with ADHD, what research has found is that there is a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and dopamine is responsible for motivation, reward, focus, and pleasure, or its primary focuses, and norepinephrine, which is involved in attention, alertness, and response time. And so what we know is that someone with ADHD, their body does not produce enough of those neurotransmitters. And so think about if I go to text Allison, and I send this text over to Allison, and I expect that AT&T is just going to take that message right to Allison, and instead it takes it to Dee. And Dee picks up this message and she goes, what? I don't know anything about that. And Allison's going, why didn't Tammy ever text me? I don't know what's going on. I need that information. And it causes mass confusion, right? That is what happens in a brain with ADHD. Those messages aren't being sent and received properly because the body doesn't produce enough of those neurotransmitters to be able to do it. And so we know that these messages control thinking, focus, managing emotions, making decisions, sleep, mood, just about everything we do. Everything we do is sent and received in our brain. So what that says is that with ADHD, everything we do is impacted in some way, shape, or form by the lack of these chemicals in our body. And so this chemical imbalance means that the attention system doesn't work effectively. It doesn't mean that the person doesn't pay attention. It's that they can't control what their brain chooses to focus on. So when their brain goes into hyperdrive going, okay, I've got to send this to Allison, I've got to send this to Allison so that it doesn't go here, well, how many other messages are not being focused on at the same time? And so it makes it really hard to do daily tasks that are simple for someone else. And so we have these lower amounts, and the other thing that is impacted is the front part of our brain is the part that's responsible for planning, prioritizing, self-control, and it's called executive functioning. And it affects that prefrontal cortex of our brain. And so we struggle with those things. Planning, prioritizing, self-control, that's where the impulsivity comes from. That's where the hard time making healthy decisions comes from. There's so much of it that goes in there. Research has also shown that we do see a difference in size of activity in key areas of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, that impacts executive functioning. But we also see it in other areas like motivation and motor control, and coordination and attention. It's interesting how many people that I find that have been adequately diagnosed with ADHD tell me like, oh, I'm so clumsy, or something like that. And they have no clue that it impacts that part of the brain too. When messages get jumbled up, everything gets jumbled up. And so we do things like drop our phone in the toilet this morning. So, that's me. And so it all gets jumbled up. And so what we're going to look at here is just some key impairment areas of the brain so that we can better understand the struggle that people have with ADHD. And so the first one we mentioned already is executive functioning. That's the brain's management system. It helps us plan, it helps us prioritize, it helps us follow through on tasks. And these tasks can be something like, what do I want for dinner? Did I pick up my dry cleaning? Switching from one task to another. And so it takes a lot of work for someone with ADHD to focus in on, what do I want for dinner? Someone else might be like, I want chicken. For someone with ADHD, it might sound more like, well, I want chicken, but you know what? We should probably eat out tonight. Now, I don't like the chicken that comes from the restaurant that's closest to my house, so we should probably drive over to this place, but they don't have good chicken, so maybe we should get the steak instead. And you know what? We needed to pick up those prescriptions, and it's right by that restaurant, so let's go over to that restaurant, but that's by the grocery store, so maybe we should just get groceries and eat at home. And the other person's sitting there like, what do you want for dinner? Because it's going and going and going. And so that's a hard one. Task switching. So that's another one that is interesting because for the average person, if I'm sitting in my room and I'm typing on my computer and somebody comes in and says, hey, can I ask you a question? And you look up and you're like, yeah, go ahead. And we have a conversation, go right back to what I'm doing. For someone with ADHD, they had to work through all these coping skills to be able to focus on the task that they're doing. So if someone comes in and politely says, hey, can I ask you a question? Rage. And we call it the ADHD rage. There is a rage because that person knows what it took to get them to be able to focus in and work on that task. And now that there's been a distraction, we can't task shift like that. And so then they're full of rage of like, now I know what I have to do again to be able to focus back in on what I was doing. And so there's just these interesting things that I think that if we ourselves have ADHD or we're interacting with someone with ADHD, it's just so good to know because then we set better plans for how we interact with them, or like giving choices, or instead of what do you want for dinner, let me give you some choices for dinner, or instead of just walking in and saying, hey, can I ask you a question, thinking, do I really need that information right this minute, or can I wait until I notice that she or he is not interacting with that task anymore. And so then for kids, it's a big deal too, because we talk about like toys they want to play with or where they want to go. It seems like we could say, hey, what do you want to wear to school today? And that not be a big deal. But for them, all of a sudden, it is a chaotic mess of how what they wear is going to affect them for that day. And so it goes on and on. So we have to be able to recognize that executive functioning is impacted. Time blindness is a big one. Difficulty estimating how long it takes to do things. So a lot of times people with ADHD are late or have to have significant processes in place in order to be on time. Because it might sound something like, I know I need to leave in 5 minutes, but I need to change over the laundry. I can do that in 5 minutes. But then they go to change over the laundry and they're like, oh, I've got to get the new laundry soap out of the, where I keep it. And I've got to go get that. And I get that. And I need to add that to my list so I don't forget. And they do that when they go to do the list. They realize, oh my goodness, I left my cup in the sink and I need to wash it or it's going to smell bad when I get home. And they do that. And then 15 minutes goes by. Oh my goodness, I've got to go. And they're running late. And so that's a big one, not being able to estimate how much time it'll take. Working memory, trying to hold on to information in their mind. So short-term memory is affected in a significant way. And if you think about it, so an example would be if I walk into this room and I don't have ADHD, I might walk in and I might be like, oh wow, this is a lovely room and I love that they chose pink and oh great, there's breakfast too if I want it. A person with ADHD might walk in and be like, oh, look at that flower, look at that shirt. What does that sign say? Oh, this person's talking to me. What was her name? What's going on? Did I put all my clothes on right? Is everything okay? So it's not, we think about it as like people can't pay attention. Someone with ADHD can't pay attention, and that's inaccurate. They actually are overstimulated by the amount of information that is coming into their brain all at once. And so they have a hard time deciding what's most important to focus on. What information do I need at this time? And so, of course, that busyness, that chaos is going to make it hard to remember short-term memory type things that are happening right now. Emotional regulation. Easily frustrated, overreactive to small events due to differences in brain structure and neurotransmitter levels. So because of the places that that are affected in the brain, the person has a hard time. So a lot of times people are labeled as overly emotional, overly reactive. So, for example, the ADHD rage. A person with ADHD isn't going to understand that. So if someone walks in and they say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question? Thinking, I'm asking. If you don't have time, that's okay. But the person gets irritated when the other person's standing there going, whoa, 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 I tried to come in peace. And I still upset you. And so the person's often, mislabeled as overly emotional or overly reactive, but it's those parts of the brain that are being impacted that make it hard for them to regulate that emotion and to keep that emotion from being like in the chaos of everything else that's going on in their mind. Impulse control. So this is saying and doing things without thinking first. Difficulty and delayed gratification. So a lot of times, dopamine, it kind of is what like energizes us to do things. And so a lot of times the person might be, if they think of an idea, they think of something they want to do, they might get a hit of that dopamine. And they're like, oh, this feels good. And so I'll just do it. And if you kind of think about it, it would be like if we had something going on physically in our body and we were in pain and we started thinking, I would do anything to make this pain stop. And if the pain gets worse, then we think that even more. I would do anything to make the pain stop. It's like that. A person with ADHD is like, I would do anything to make this busyness stop, to be able to think clearly, to be able to follow through on this task, to be able to feel like I got something done. And so their brain starts going, oh, that makes me feel good, so I'm just going to do it. And with little thought what the outcome's going to be or what the consequences could be, they just do it. And especially in kids that haven't been taught skills to regulate at all, it makes sense that the brain is brilliant and comes up with, oh, that gave me relief. That like helped my brain rest. That felt good. And then they start doing certain behaviors, and as adults or people that don't have ADHD, we're judging like, why would you do that? What were you thinking? And it's like most of the time that's the thing, is their brain was hijacked in that moment and was trying to regulate itself in any way it could. And that doesn't always make sense to us. But the more we understand ADHD and the more particular we understand how a specific person is affected by it, the more ways that we can go, oh, I will help you do it differently. Let's come up with a different plan. Let's come up with a different skill to be able to do that same thing. It'll save us all some frustration. Task initiation and follow through. So a lot of times we see there's procrastination followed by burst of activity under pressure. Again, that's a feedback thing that they're seeking. When we don't have enough dopamine to give us that motivation to plan and do the things. But then if we get under pressure and our brain starts producing dopamine, then it's like, oh, I've got to get this done, and has the ability to do it. So a lot of times people with ADHD hear things like, you're lazy, you are not productive, you procrastinate, and really they're just waiting for their brain to give them the chemicals necessary to get the task done. And so again, once we know that, then we can go back and go, okay, how can we give you more of those chemicals in the beginning when you didn't have enough? How can we help you with skills to be able to do that? And so, let's see. People with ADHD may struggle to switch off their internal mind-wandering mode, also known as the default mode network. And that is basically your background chatter. You know, that internal chatter that goes on that the average person would pick and choose when they let that chatter happen. If I'm driving, I might let that chatter go. You know, it's just chatter. It's just going on back there. With someone with ADHD, doesn't have the ability to control turning on and turning off that chatter. So that chatter is constantly going. So then it's likely that if they're in a conversation, that someone's going to think that they're not paying attention or not listening to them or don't care about what they're saying, when really they might just be overly distracted by the chatter that's going on back there, and have to work on how do we manage that chatter. There's a paper. Did you print out, Allison, the last one, or did, yes. On there, I did just put diagnostic criteria on the bottom. To be diagnosed with ADHD, there's three, so how I mentioned, there's three different presentations: predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and then a combined presentation. And to be able to be diagnosed with ADHD, a child has to have 6 of those criteria met in one of those areas for a 6-month span or more. And an adult needs 5 symptoms in any one of those categories to be able to. And we also say it has to be in 2 different settings. So like if we are diagnosing them, we will look at school and at home, or home and at work, or home and at church. So it has to be that these things show up in 2 different settings for longer than 6 months, and you have 5 for adults and 6 for children. And remembering that there has to be clear evidence of impairment. It impacts me in a negative way in these 2 different areas. And so I just put those on there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought that it's interesting to be able to look at it and go, okay, this helps me better understand how we diagnose. So let's talk about gender differences a little bit. Boys tend to have externalized behavior, fidgeting, acting out, impulsivity, hyperactive, disrupting class. They're more likely to be recommended for testing because it's disruptive for everyone. For a female, it tends to be in here. So teachers don't recommend for testing very often because it's not disrupting their class. And ADHD is not a disorder that you can develop as an adult. It is something that you have, it's a childhood disorder. And so people grow up without it being diagnosed, but we don't just get it as an adult. So for girls, it's more internalized symptoms: daydreaming, inattentiveness, low self-esteem or withdrawn. The symptoms are often misdiagnosed as having anxiety, depression, mood disorder, or even just being emotional. Men tend to present it with impulsivity and distractibility, more risk-taking, impulsive, or job-related issues. Women, and I gave some more examples here because we're talking as women, but they often experience overwhelm, emotional dysregulation, internalized shame. And the thing is that women are prone to do what we call mask ADHD. And so women with ADHD will typically spend an enormous amount of effort to appear organized and put together, but it took them 10 times more effort than it would the average person to do the exact same thing. And so as women, we mask it. We go, okay, I have to be able to do this. I have to meet the standards. And we mask it. And so that's why it ends up showing up as shame. Why can't I do what the other moms do? Why can't I do what the other wives do? What can't I do what the other women do? They can all just do it. Why can't I? And it shows up as that shame. So then it leads to perfectionism, overwhelm, emotional sensitivity. And we do know that hormonal shifts worsen symptoms for women too. And so a lot of times it is so misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed in women. And the reason why is because the diagnostic criteria started with young boys. And so the research information we had was all on males that had it. So the diagnostic criteria didn't fit females. We didn't have that at that time. So girls were flying under the radar because they weren't disruptive, but still having that internal battle with the disorder. It's underdiagnosed because of subtle symptoms or masking behaviors is a big one. Internal struggles like overthinking and emotional dysregulation are just labeled as anxiety. She's anxious. And that can get confused. And so anxiety and ADHD do have overlapping symptoms. So sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. The best piece of information I can give that helps me distinguish the two when I am diagnosing ADHD is that anxiety is rooted in fear and ADHD is rooted in distractibility. And so this helps separate out some of that. And it can be comorbid. It can be that someone has both. That's highly likely. But sometimes we just misdiagnose it and go, oh, well, this person's just anxious, when in reality, their symptoms are coming out of a place of that distractibility and not out of fear. And so over lifespan, kind of what we see the changes being is like preschoolers, we're going to see constant motion, emotional outbursts, difficult sitting still. And then we get to school-age children, and we're going to see trouble focusing, blurting out answers, losing homework, struggling with socializing. We start seeing that more in school age. Maybe feeling lazy or bad due to repeated scolding that they're getting. Why can't you just turn in your homework? Why can't you just do this? Why can't you just pass? Teenagers, impulsive decision-making, academic underachievement despite their potential. This is a big key indicator for me when I have teens that I'm seeing. If I'm looking at them and going, you're a very intelligent, well-rounded person, and you're failing your classes, this doesn't make sense. That's a key indicator for me to start going, okay, let's see what might be going on here. We also see risk of substance use, low self-esteem, and strained peer relationship. It's hard to maintain relationships if you don't understand yourself and other people don't understand you, to be able to function in a relationship where it doesn't seem like your symptoms are just inattentive, don't care. College students struggle with independence, procrastination, time management. They may crash and burn now that they don't have external structures. I see this a lot. People coming back going, I thought I was ready for college. I'm devastated. I didn't make it through. Well, their structural support is gone. And if they don't know how to recreate it, crash and burn is very common. Adults, difficulty holding jobs, maintaining routines, managing finances, trouble with relationship due to forgetfulness or emotional overreactions, and many are not diagnosed until their kids are diagnosed. And so I see this often, that as a parent is fighting through what's going on with their kid, then they go, wait, they're hearing the diagnostic criteria, they're hearing the struggle, and they're going, wait, I struggle with that. Wait, that's me. Wait, this is biological, this is genetic. And oftentimes that's when we're finding that adults get diagnosed. So coping skills, skipped over this, treatments for it. Medication, we have stimulant and non-stimulant options of medication. The stimulants actually impact the chemicals, whereas non-stimulants impact the pathways in the brain. And so we have two different routes, especially if someone struggles with addiction. Then we go with the non-stimulant route. Therapy, there's things like CBT that help with restructuring thought patterns and managing impulsivity and targets unhelpful thinking and builds new routines. We have coaching that's focused on just daily strategies and accountability. Lifestyle choices such as exercise that improves blood flow and helps with cognitive functioning. We have things like omega-3s that help increase dopamine levels, good sleep hygiene, reduced screen overload. This is a big one because screen time gives that high amount of information that their brain is used to. So then if they're on screen time a lot and used to that and then go into a calmer environment, their brain is wanting the fast pace of the screen. And so it's harder for them to adjust to that. And of course, a combined approach of treatment, including medication, therapy, and lifestyle choices, is ideally what we want to help someone be the most successful. So coping skills for children, we use visual schedules and alarms, chunking tasks, taking them and not saying, go clean your room, but being able to say, hey, go put up all your shoes in your room. Now go put up your toys in your room, and chunking the task so that they don't walk into this messy room and go, oh my gosh, I have to put up my shoes, I have to put up my clothes, I have to put up my toys, I have to put up all the things. And then they get overwhelmed and shut down because they can't get started doing it. Clear and consistent routines, movement breaks. And I think this one's a big one for adults too. I think that if we were more mindful to give ourselves movement breaks, that it helps with our body keeping up the blood flow that helps with producing the chemicals we need to complete tasks. Body doubling. This is where someone just is in the room with you. They don't have to be doing the same task. I love the research done on body doubling because it shows that if someone is in the room with us, we are more likely to stay on task and be more productive, even if they're not interacting with us. If they're sitting in the corner reading a book and I'm cleaning the room, we tend to be more productive with a human being in the room. And so with adults and kids, this is great to know because say a kid is doing their homework and they're in the kitchen by themselves, and we could literally help them by sitting in the room and doing and folding laundry. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we just adjust to be able to help with that? For adults, time blocking. So again, that's kind of like chunking things, like giving time. If my Saturday comes, I'm going to designate time to do certain tasks. Alarms. Being able to set an alarm. In 15 minutes, I'm going to start this project and set an alarm just to get us started. External structure like planners, apps, checklists help. Minimalist workspace. When we're doing something, reducing as many external distractions as we can. Body doubling. And mindfulness to increase attention regulation. So just practicing being able to sit outside for 5 minutes and not hyper-focus on something or not hyper-focus on having to do things. In school, we have supports like IEPs and 504s. It's helpful that the school is able to help give us ideas in school that are going to help the kid not be as distracted, not be distracting, therefore getting in trouble less. Workplace, there's accommodations under the ADA, and there's support groups and online communities. And I know I have gone over time, so I am going to go through this a little bit quickly, but I do think it's important. One thing that we're seeing and understanding a little bit better is it's called RSD, and it is rejection sensitivity disorder. And one of the most powerful statistics I've ever heard about ADHD is that by the age of 12, children with ADHD have received 20,000 more negative messages from parents, teachers, and other adults than their neurotypical peers. 20,000. So these are statements like, why can't you just focus? Stop being lazy. You're so disorganized. Because they may be more impulsive and often experience more negative interactions, being scolded, corrected, because they're misunderstood. And so if you think about that and how we were talking about so many adults not being diagnosed properly, it's a good reminder of like, yeah, as a kid, this is a childhood development disorder. You didn't just get it. You've always had it. And how did that impact how other people talked to you or treated you or saw your potential? And so it really does impact the feeling of rejection. I am trying so hard to do this, and I just can't. And I'm being told all these negative things. Of course that's going to impact how we see ourselves. Of course it's going to impact how we feel about our self-esteem, value, worth, character, and that. And so that is something that I'm hoping that we're going to see more research done in so that we can be aware of that. Because then what happens is as an adult, somebody says something that may not necessarily be negative. But if I perceive it as negative because I've had so much rejection in my life, then I feel rejected anyway. And so it's like, oh, I just live defeated. I live rejected because I hear these things. And sometimes it's just perception. The person's not even meaning to be rejecting. It might be like, why didn't you take out the trash? And the person's like, I failed again. I disappointed them again. What happened here? And so they feel rejected when that's not what's happening, but that's the experience that they have. And so for me, I always look at it and I'm like, I believe that God is the great Redeemer. That is my favorite attribute of him. And I know that God knows that we live in fallen bodies and that there are things that don't function properly to fit into society. You know, it's interesting because it's such a huge statistic that you would think we could accept it as like, that's not neurodivergent. It's pretty common. We probably need to adjust some things in society to better accommodate that not all people think the same way, behave the same way. We should probably give some lenience to that. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but I do think we're making some strides in it. But I believe that God's the great Redeemer. And I believe that with those challenges come a unique set of strengths that other people don't have. And so when we recognize that people with differently wired brains actually bring value, innovation, and creativity to the world, then we can appreciate it and support it instead of being frustrated and limited by it. And studies suggest that approximately 20 to 30% of entrepreneurs and CEOs are diagnosed or have ADHD. That's an extremely higher rate than the general adult population. So the general adult population, 4.4%. CEOs and entrepreneurs, 20 to 30%. These are the people that are getting it. These are the people that are going, I can use this to my advantage. I can overcome this. I can work through this. I can redeem this part of my brain, these parts of my brain that aren't functioning like they were created to function, but I can still use them. And so here are different ways that people use that. Creativity and innovation. People with ADHD don't think linear. They think outside of the box. And so many of them excel in creative fields like art, writing, music, marketing, design. They tend to be the big idea generators. A lot of them are visionaries because they're seeing this big picture. And that dopamine hit that they get gives them the energy to go, yep, I can do that. I got that. Hyperfocus. This is something that happens with ADHD where they tend to hyperfocus on a certain thing. So it might be sewing. And I buy all the materials and all the things that I need. Why? Dopamine's going off. And I'm just enjoying it. I'm loving it. It's great. And then all of a sudden, the dopamine's not coming as fast. And I'm not as interested. And baking, I love baking. And I buy all the things and I start making cakes and I start doing all the things. And then it doesn't. And then we move on and it just keeps going. And we call it like dopamining is the kind of silly term for it, is mining for dopamine. Their brain is just like, what is going to help me stay motivated? And so hyperfocus though, when they're interested in something, their state can enter an intense state of focus that helps with being able to produce incredible work because they can hyperfocus like someone else can't. Resilience, highly adaptable and determined after years of overcoming obstacles. We find that because they have to work harder to figure out things differently, they're more resilient than the average person. High energy and enthusiasm. Their natural drive can be contagious. In the right environment, this energy can fuel productivity and leadership. So a lot of times people with ADHD are the ones, shockingly, like ironically, getting people motivated. Their energy is what is pulling people in to stay motivated. Curiosity and passion. ADHD minds are drawn to novelty, which can deep dive into learning. We see a lot of researchers that have ADHD that have done phenomenal work that other people just weren't out of the box enough to think. Empathy and sensitivity. Many people with ADHD feel deeply and are attuned to the emotions of others. It's interesting, my 17-year-old son, who has ADHD, and then I have 3 older daughters. He is more emotionally in tune than any of them. If I walked in the house and I was feeling down or something like that, they might not even notice. Hey, you need a hug, Mom? That's so atypical for a 17-year-old boy. But for him, he is in tune to that. And he can see that. In fact, this morning, one of the things that I tell my kids is don't forget your crown when they leave the house. And this morning he said, do you want me to carry stuff out to the car? I'm like, of course, please, thank you. And he carries it out, and I get in the car, and he goes, hey, I hope you do well. And I say, thank you. And he looks at me and he says, hey, don't forget your crown. And that's just atypical for a 17-year-old boy to think on that level. But for him, as much as I'm like, hey, take out the trash. Hey, why didn't you take out the trash? Next, take out the trash. And get frustrated with him. He's also the one that emotionally is in tune and understands what is going on emotionally in an environment. And so empathy and sensitivity, that's a big one. Spontaneity and humor, quick-witted and adventurous. People with ADHD often bring joy and fun to social situations. And then also big picture thinkers. Because their brains jump from idea to idea, they often make connections others miss. This is helpful for brainstorming and innovation. A lot of times what we see is, say, 2 people, one who's neurotypical, one who has ADHD, come into a boardroom to solve a problem. The one with ADHD has already solved the problem and is 10 tasks down the road before the other one collects their thoughts enough to even be able to understand the problem that's happening. And so that rapid fire thinking, that ability to think of so many things at one time, helps problem solve so much better and so much faster. And so I do believe that when we stop trying to fix people with ADHD and instead learn how to understand it and support it, that we begin to see not just the struggles, but the strengths. People with ADHD don't need to be made normal, which is what we've tried to do. We've tried to force them back into mainstream thinking. Instead, they need to be seen, supported, and celebrated. And in that, I believe that is God's redemption, taking something that's not working properly and still using it to be impactful in the world. And I had an activity to do, but I think we're going to skip out on that for time's sake. Yes, no.
I don't have anywhere to be.
Okay. Chuck, I'm going to need your help for this, if that's okay. Can I use your help? So I'm going to tell Chuck what I need him to do real quick.
Okay.
All right, Chuck's been voluntold. Poor Chuck, he says, I'm just here to do sound.
I'm on extra pay for that.
Done. I'll double your salary.
Yeah, that's just last year. This year.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out a short story, and then we're going to answer some questions about it at the end. Okay? Well, just listen. Okay, you ready? One evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along in a boat. Just as he was, a furious storm came, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." Thank you, Chuck. He's a good helper back there. So this is a common story that we often have heard in church. And so as I'm reading it to you, and Chuck is just mindlessly doing things back here, if we look at it and we ask the question, like, okay, so where was Jesus going?
He was in a boat. To the other side.
To the other side, yeah. and what was Jesus doing during the storm?
Sleeping. Resting.
Yes, he was resting. And what was who was in the boat with Jesus?
The disciples.
Yeah. And what question did Jesus ask the disciples?
It got a little louder about that time.
Right? Yeah. He said, "Why are you so afraid? Do you have no faith?"
Right.
And so the reason I do this is to try and help understand what it's like in the brain of someone with ADHD all day, every day. And so I look at it and I go, was it hard to pay attention? Were you easily distracted?
Yeah.
What's going on? Why's Chuck doing this? Like, we're just trying to listen. Did you feel frustrated? I wish you would stop. Overwhelmed? I'm trying to listen. I'm really trying to listen. If he would just stop, then I could pay attention. And then did you have to work extra hard to listen to what I was saying, to hear me? And so thinking about it and being able to, I put some reflection questions on there that you can look at later, but it's just to be able to increase that empathy and that compassion and understanding that is what's going on in a person's brain with ADHD. There's constant chatter, there's constant distraction, and it's not that they won't pay attention, it's that they can't. It's why did that happen? Why did that chair move? What's he gonna do next? Can he not just sit down? It's like all of that going on in every task that they do all day long. And it helps us better understand why someone with ADHD will do anything for dopamine.
Wow. Because
if I'm sitting here and I know I could focus more if Chuck would just stop, then I can say to Chuck, "Stop." I can, and I don't care. If it hurts his feelings, I don't care. I'll say it nicely and I'll say it respectfully, but I don't care because I can't focus if he's doing that. And so that's how we help build empathy, is by understanding that it's not just someone not paying attention, being emotional. It's really a struggle within the brain's chemistry to be able to focus and to complete tasks the same way that everyone else does. So do we want to open up for questions? While she's picking up questions, I will just say this is a series that I use a lot. They have several different books. This one is the ADHD workbook for teens. They have anxiety for teens, depression for teens. And it's a good resource to have. It says for teens, but I'm all about using it for adults also, because it's short tasks that you can go through and it helps explain things really well. I ordered this one on Amazon. And like I said, like it is for teens, but I love the structure of it. So I recommend it for adults all the time. I think it's more manageable. When we talk about task chunking, this is an example, taking a big thing and just making it a little bit of information. And so, okay, so the first question is, what causes our brain development to go awry? The most simple answer to that is we live in a fallen world and fallen bodies.
Say it again.
We live in a fallen world and fallen bodies. And so there's just things in our body that don't develop properly. And when we talk about something like ADHD, we could compare it to a physical limitation also, of like if I was born without a hand or something like that, my body didn't form the way God intended it to form. And so there's a struggle that exists. What does it mean to develop new pathways? So when we use different coping skills, what we know about our brain is that as long as we are living, we can literally teach it new things. And it literally grooves pathways into our brain. And so through repetition, through consistent scheduling, through using different coping skills, what we do is we tell our brain, hey, this doesn't work the way I want it to, so I'm going to almost ritualistically do this over and over and over again until you groove another pathway and you learn a new way to do it. Can being treated for ADHD eliminate anxiety, depression, and mood disorders? This question, okay, so I wouldn't use the word eliminate. We can have both. Someone can realistically have ADHD and any one of those things. However, I do believe that misdiagnosed ADHD will present as anxiety or depression or mood disorder. And so because of that, if we're treating the wrong thing, we're just putting a Band-Aid on it. Whereas if we figure out what the root of it is, then these things tend to go away a lot of times when we actually deal with the actual problem. So if a person has medication and therapy and lifestyle choices that help them with their ADHD, well, then they're not going to feel like a failure. That sense of shame is going to go down. They're going to feel like, oh, I finished my checklist. So anxiety is going to start going away. I'm able to function. My brain is quiet. I'm not so frustrated all the time. I'm not questioning myself all the time. So depression starts going away. I can handle someone interrupting me and it not be a big deal. I can handle the task of the day. I can handle the emotional interaction with people. I don't experience as much rejection. And so the mood disorder starts going away. So if it's a true diagnosis of these things, then no, it's not going to eliminate it. However, if it is a symptom of ADHD, then yes, we would anticipate that those things would go away. How do you mask ADHD if you can't control it? So this is a great question. So with masking, they're figuring out skills that make it look like they have it all together. So that looks like I am having people come over and I quickly shove everything in the cabinets. I can't clean the house. Maybe I have the time to, but I can't do it. And so I mask it by acting like there wasn't a mess. Or I don't want people to know that I'm insecure and emotionally. And so I mask it by acting like I have self-confidence, by acting like I have self-worth. Sometimes that can even come out aggressively. You know, people trying to mask that can be received as aggression. Is CBT the same as counseling? So CBT is a type of counseling. So in counseling, we have a lot of different theories that we use to work through. And CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And so it is working on your thoughts to change your behaviors. And so some types of therapies might work on your behaviors to change your thoughts. This one specifically targets your thoughts so that your behaviors will change with it. So this one said childhood disorder, why? And are you born with it? We kind of just addressed that a little bit, and that's I'm not surprised it shows up twice, but yes, you are born with it, and it's just the lack of the body being able to produce that amount of chemical. Genetic, must any mental illness or only ADHD? Some are genetic, some are not. So they're like something like anxiety can come from trauma. Depression can come from trauma. So it can be something that's not genetic. And then sometimes it's just a chemical imbalance that you were born with. And so then it is. So not all mental illnesses are one or the other. Most of them are kind of like ADHD, to where we look at it and we go, it's an 80-20 split. Probably 80% of it is genetic, 20% is premature births, exposure to substances when pregnant, things like that. Is TV also overstimulating or only screen? Yeah, so I'm using screen time as a generic for electronics in that case. So yeah, anything that is screen time, electronic, anything that can give a faster amount of information to you than the actual world can, is going to be disruptive for someone with ADHD. They get used to that because they can accept it fast. So then when they go into the world, it's boring. It's slow. It's like, give me more information. It's also why, so a lot of people with ADHD will interrupt because they're like, well, I already know that and I want more information and give it to me fast. And so that interruption that happens can be because of that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is that detrimental, or does that cause more difficulty in other situations if they have too much screen time?
Mm-hmm. So because, say that someone with ADHD watches TV a lot and they're used to that amount of stimulation, and then they go to school and the teacher can be, interactive and everything, but she's not as fast as the TV is. Mm-hmm. She's not producing that as fast. Then they're going to become disruptive, bored, make trouble, just because they're like, well, this is boring. This isn't stimulating me. ADHD people are looking for their brain to be stimulated and engaged. And so it's easy when it's fast fired. It's not easy when it's slowly, it feels like a drip to them. And so it'll cause behaviors that wouldn't be
Makes sense.
otherwise. Challenges versus strengths. Some of the geniuses in the world. Yes, that is absolutely true. We do see, it is so true that, like we said with CEOs and everything, people with ADHD just problem solve faster. They read people faster. They make great leaders because they can delegate tasks instead of having to complete them themselves. And the impulsivity makes it great because they're willing to try things other people aren't. They'll just jump out there and do it when somebody else may not have the nerve to do it. They're like, well, yeah, just try it. It's great. Go ahead. High level of divorce. Yes. This is a yes. And I believe that is specifically important at this given time because of where we're at and because it was the 80s before we even had better diagnostic criteria, and past 2010 when we came up with criteria for adults having ADHD. I think that we have a massive amount of people right now that do not understand how their brain functions. And if I don't understand, how in the world am I going to explain that to my partner? And so I do believe it also asks about debt. Yes.
Dopamine.
Yeah, dopamine, yeah. Dopamine or dopamine debt?
Dopamine debt.
Yes,
This
yes.
first makes me feel good today.
Yes, yes.
Jeez.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So dopamine, I give this example all the time. Like, I have to be really careful. I love Amazon because I get on Amazon and I go for the search, and that gives me a dopamine hit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decide to purchase the thing, and that gives me a dopamine hit. And then I forget I purchased it, that short working memory. So when it comes in, guess what? I'm excited all over again. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got a package. Like, I didn't order it. And so, yes, debt is something very common with people in ADHD because it is that dopamine hit and the impulsivity of it mixed together. Like, this feels good and it helps me feel motivated. So for example, for me, it might be something like, I should start working out. You know what I should do? I should buy myself a new pair of tennis shoes. Because if I get some tennis shoes, that's going to help with my motivation.
Yes.
And I'm going to work out. And while I'm on here, I might as well get a cute little outfit because that's going to get me to the gym, you know? And so you just start spinning out on recognizing that spending money to buy things gives that dopamine that then motivates you to do something, but it's not a sustainable motivator. And so we end up just in debt. So yes, that is a skill that really has to be learned to manage. Has there been any oh, wait, I missed some. No, I did get that one. Okay. Questions. A period of time so many kids were put on meds, diagnosed, and the church was highly disturbed. Yes, okay. This.
I remember.
And,
How did they get that?
yes, and this is a big one and why I think adults are misdiagnosed right now also. So we had a period of time where, so about the 80s,
80s, 90s.
late 80s, early 90s, where there was a increase in diagnosis. Well, when we look at the timeline, it makes sense because in the 80s was when we had enough research to truly understand this is a biological disorder. So at that time, all of a sudden, doctors are like, we have information we didn't have before. And so we're able to diagnose people in ways we weren't before. We're able to move away from a moral character development and actually help these kids. So in that, we're developing meds to help with ADHD, and the church specifically, yes, but society in general, because the mindset was, well, don't give them sugar. Don't parent them better. Tell them not to do that. And then there's a medication for it. Then there became a big uproar of we're medicating when we need to discipline.
We're just trying to drug our kids so they'll be calm in the classroom.
Yes.
And we just want to dope them out.
Mhm.
That was what we heard all the time.
Yep. Yes. And that has been so predominant. I would say probably from the late 80s to probably current for sure. But also just really pushed until about 2013, probably when we changed the diagnostic criteria. That helped a little bit. But yes, we're trying to come out of generational information that's poured into us that the kid's just bad, the kid's just out of control. Control yourself. If you just have anxiety, trust God more, pray, it'll be okay. You know?
Is there a danger to the person who's diagnosed incorrectly, or just needs a little extra help to settle down?
From the medication, you mean?
Uh-huh.
So any medication has an opportunity to have side effects, and everybody reacts differently. We have we look at medications generationally, so I could probably give some Adderall that people would be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. But then it's we could go into other ones that I could list that are newer medications that we use. So we have the stimulants and the non-stimulants. So typically, if one affects the person and they have some type of side effect, then we change over to the other. Or we change over to a long release. So maybe somebody's body can't handle the medication all at once, but if it's, drawn out in their blood system throughout all the day, they can handle that and it's better for them. So right now we have much better options. Before, that kind of like did fuel the misconception that it was bad, because if a kid had a negative reaction and a stimulant was the only thing we had at that time, then it was like, see, it makes them worse. Like, see, it makes them flatline, or it makes them not be like zombified or something like that. And what we're finding now is we just didn't get the right medication. So, and this just came to my mind and is kind of random, but adults, we're in this coffee kick generation. Everything's coffee, 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 but first coffee and everything. Some of that is just sheer enjoyment. Another big theory of mine is that it's a stimulant. And so a stimulant in somebody who doesn't have ADHD gives them energy. A stimulant in someone who does have ADHD calms their brain down. So it has the opposite effect. And so we find that a lot of people are self-medicated and drinking caffeine all day long just to be able to regulate the busyness of their brain. It's a stimulant. So,
And if the child takes it during school year, but not in the summertime?
So people have different, there's very different views on that. A lot of doctors, because of stimulants and how they interact with the body, they will say, take a vacation from your med. If you don't need it, don't take it. So for example, stimulants could cause an increased heart rate. And so they're like, okay, don't take it if you don't need it. That is not my particular approach on it, because I feel like that's neglecting the emotional dysregulation, the executive dysfunction. Like, so what they'll do is they'll be like, well, this helps them during school so they can get their stuff done. But during the summer, they don't have school, so it's okay if they have high energy. We're out, we're doing a lot. I think we forget about the emotional dysregulation, and we forget about the time blindness, and there's all these other things that it's impacting. So my personal preference is that someone stays on the medication.
My thought is they didn't need it in the first place.
Well, and sometimes I think that what the idea is like school is so demanding of someone that it's like, this is extra help to get you through school. Whereas in the summer, we can depend on your coping skills. Like, we can just depend on skills for you to manage yourself. And so I think that's why a lot of parents do it, or why a lot of doctors will encourage it, is just to give their body a break from taking medication. And I think maybe for some kids, because it is a spectrum disorder, and so it can be worse for certain people, or present with worse, harder symptoms for certain people. And so I think maybe for certain people that could be true, but I think for someone that has more extreme symptoms, we are doing them a disservice by stopping that and not giving their brain the support that it needs during that time. I see a lot of parents get really frustrated with kids over the summer when they're home, and then I'll say, well, do they have ADHD? Yes. Well, do you medicate them? Well, no, they're not in school. And it's like, well, if it was just a hyperactivity, that would make sense. But if it's all the other things we're talking about, those still need to be regulated whether we're in school or not. And that's just my opinion. But there's strong kind of beliefs on both sides for that.
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
So on April the 28th, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I went on some medication called Strattera, and took it for 48 hours, and then I had bad side effects, and I had to get off of it. I still cry about it because when I was on it, the world was a better place. My mind was quiet. I was at peace. And so to me, just with my personal experience, if you have a child and your child is going through that, then I would want them to take it all the time because they can be at peace. Their mind is not like constantly going. It's just so hard. So I think it's a compassionate thing. I mean, obviously everybody's got to decide for themselves, but it's a compassionate thing to give your child medication.
Yeah. And I can back that with a personal story of I have a son who was diagnosed when he was 8, and I was like, well, he doesn't need medication. We just need to figure this out. We need to get better skills. I didn't understand ADHD at that time. And so we kept fighting and we kept doing the things and working so hard to do this. And finally, when he was 10 and school was getting a little bit harder and everything, I was like, okay, we're gonna have to medicate him for this. And I remember just weeping, just sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, what I've put you through over the last 2 years when there was help for you. But I thought that we could just help you through it. We could give you skills through it and everything. And so I think it is really hard because this is a thing that has its newer research that we're looking at. When we're talking about from even 1902, when they were calling it a character disorder, knew it existed but didn't know what to do with it, we're only talking about 125 years of research, and we need long-term research to really be able to understand things. Not until the 50s when we really started researching it as a biological issue. So we're talking about 50 to 75 years, and then studying it with men or on boys, not girls. I think that we are just getting to a place where we're better understanding it. So even as a therapist, back when he was 8, being like, oh, well, we'll just work on skills and we'll work on, this and everything. And it's just that fear of like, does he need it? Does he not need it? Are we going to over medicate him? What's going to happen? And I let that fear make that decision for me, and then severely regretted it afterwards, and that's not to shame myself or anything like that, but just to recognize that that was a hard thing for us to learn together as a family. And
As you said, I'm sorry for extending this, but as you said, there's a spectrum, and some may not have it as severely as others. So that some might be able to be helped with only
that's true.
skills and that kind of thing.
Sure. Other similar kinds of diagnoses. ADHD, we used to diagnose ADD. We don't do that anymore. The new diagnostic criteria took it out, and that was just attention deficit disorder by itself. What we did is we changed it to ADHD, and then we put those subcategories of inattentive type or hyperactive type or combined presentation. So because of those 3 categories, there really aren't many. There's overlapping things, for sure, like PTSD and ADHD can have overlapping symptoms, anxiety and ADHD, depression, mood disorder. So there's a lot that can have similar symptoms, but nothing is coming to mind right off the top of my head that would be like close to what we're diagnosing with it. Lead to addiction. This is a big one, because people with ADHD, we could look up the statistic, but it's significantly higher because of their impulsivity that they're going to become addicted to something. They're more likely to try something if it's offered.
Because they want to quiet it down.
Yeah.
And it works.
And that's the thing too, is that, it works, self-medicating. If I can smoke marijuana and it calms me down, well then why bother developing skills that I need or seeing a doctor to get the medication that I need, because it's working. And so it's multiple things. It's the rejection sensitivity that leads a lot of times to look for groups that understand them and accept them. And so we see a lot of that leading to drug abuse. The impulsivity, if somebody says, hey, try this, they're like, okay, I'll try this, and just trying it. The self-medicating can lead to it. And then a stimulant can be addicting, which is why we monitor it so closely. You can only prescribe it for 30 days. The government knows when you picked it up. There's a regimented thing of how we prescribe it to help navigate that. When someone truly has ADHD, though, what I find is that they don't tend to misuse it because it works. And so their brain is quieted, and that's what they were wanting and needing. And so why take more? And even if they do take more, then it's like, it doesn't do more. It didn't help more, right? So why bother? What we really find is people that without ADHD are the ones who misuse stimulants because it does increase their energy. And so they can take an Adderall and get stuff done, just, be this bionic person. And so they are going to tend to try to get medication or misuse it more than a person with ADHD is, because it's not going to benefit them. They're going to be like, I didn't do anything different. Has there been any research to show a correlation between diet and symptoms of ADHD? Yes, yes, and yes. This is a very common research going on right now, and I love it. So these neurotransmitters that we're talking about, our stomach actually produces more of them than our brain does. And so while the old stigma of sugar causes it, no, that's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about when you have good gut health and you're managing your stomach well, it has the ability to produce more of those neurotransmitters that our brain is needing. And so I think that we forget that that's a big part of it, is that, or I think a lot of times we don't even know, because it's such an uncommon thing to talk about, that those neurotransmitters, they start in our gut. And so our gut health is really important. I'm still confused about the hyperactivity part. So just in general, the hyperactivity part is the outward display of the inward symptoms. And so the hyperactivity would be a kid that is bored in class because of the understimulation, and they're trying to create some dopamine going on. It's the wanting blood flow because blood flow increases dopamine. It's just what it looks like on the outside, reflecting what's going on in their brain. Is there a scale of severity of ADHD symptoms? So yeah, like we talked about, it's a scale, and we can be anywhere on that spectrum of it. Do other conditions like hyperthyroidism diagnosed with age correlate to an ADHD diagnosis? I don't know how to answer that in a short answer, other than to say that ADHD impacts everything we do. It is the, attention center of our brain that's going on. So while I don't know if it directly correlates with a medical diagnosis like hyperthyroidism, I can surely see that it could impact any part of our body functioning, because we're not getting the sleep we need, we're not getting the exercise we need, we're not, people with ADHD tend to forget to eat, so they're not getting the nutrition that they need, stuff like that. So I could see how it could impact any medical or physical part of our body also. Hormonal changes with age correlation, 100%. So that is newer research that we're doing right now too that I'm loving is how hormones impact it. Because when we see a hormonal shift, then that's going to impact all the hormones in our body. That's going to impact where our body is fueled to make neurotransmitters and everything else. And so while I don't have enough information to say why that correlation is, I do know that research is pointing to there is a high correlation. And I just think personally, when we're talking about hormonal changes in general, I just feel bad for young ladies right now, because so many things are like, oh, you're just being hormonal. And it's like thrown off on that. And I'm like, why can't we go back to like biblical times where they sent you out of camp for a week? Like, you know, they were on to something. Like, because really we treat it like it's this minor thing, and we don't realize there's a whole dysregulation of the physical body. It is just completely dysregulated. And we look at it like, she's being hormonal, and it's like, yes, I am. Like, my body's going through it. And so definitely with hormonal changes as far as teenage years or getting older, and biological changes that are happening, I definitely think that plays a huge impact in how we're experiencing the ADHD and just the availability of the chemicals that we need to regulate ourselves. Any other questions? There's a lot of information.
Along that topic, so do y'all find that ADHD teens tend to have more struggles with their cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
And we actually see it as increased like symptoms going on. And that includes like mood dysregulation, because if they already can't, and now their hormones aren't supporting it, of course it's going to make it a lot more. So we see a lot like depression, actually suicidal ideation is a big one that we correlate between not just menstrual cycles, but that paired with something like ADHD going on, to where we have become much more attentive to watching females and how, if they have ADHD, how their hormonal changes.
What about physiologically, like having higher levels of pain and agony? Okay.
Symptoms are going to increase because we don't have, it's kind of like, I look at our chemicals like currency, and we're spending currency to make our body regulate. And so if it's spending all this currency over here, and then there's these hormonal changes that take place, then my body doesn't have the resources it needs to regulate those things that I'm feeling. So that pain, or even like levels of how it impacts their cycle, mood, all of those things, the body doesn't have the full resources to be able to manage that. So we also see a lot more exhaustion in people that have hormonal changes and ADHD. Those will play off of each other. Yeah, for sure. All the way around, those things play off each other.
What's the name of your organization that you work with?
I work with LifeSpring Behavioral. And so they're a office there in the Woodlands.
And it has many therapists that work. Do y'all work individually or for the team? We
all work together as a team. So there's one neat thing about our organization is we have psychiatrists, we have NPs, we have therapists, we have addiction specialists, and we all work together because all of us who have come together believe in two primary things, is that God first is where we go to. The Bible's the best psychology book that ever existed, and all of our treatments come out of that and align with it. And two, that working together as a team is the best approach. That if we're just doing medicine and we're not doing therapy, we're not meeting our goal. If we're just doing therapy and we're not doing medicine, sometimes we're not meeting our goal. And so we actually get together all together as a team at given times and staff our cases together. And so in our office, there's not a big distinguishment between like the doctors and the therapist, or the MPs and the therapist. We're all collaborating together. That's our big key word. We are all collaborating together, so that I can go to a doctor at any time and go, hey, you know what? Like, can we talk about this? And they're like, absolutely, let's talk about it. Or a doctor can say, hey, I changed this person's meds. Can you keep an eye on them, make sure that you don't see any ups and downs, any major changes, any side effects that you hear of? And by collaborating, we create a much better holistic approach to how we treat an individual.
It was called Life Spring what?
Behavioral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing. I love what we do there. And it's very unique in how they approach it, because at a lot of places it's not like that. If it's like therapy and meds are separate, and here it's like, nope, it's all together. Like, we are all here for one patient, and that's what we're working on. All right.
I think you did a wonderful job
Well,
of being
thank
so
you.
clear from A to Z. You're just so
I
crystal clear.
I appreciate it. And obviously spend extra time on this. I appreciate y'all's time. It's so much information. And that's why I do give a handout. I did forget, I made another handout of like just coping skills and some apps that are available to help with people with ADHD and some